internet difficulties, so we'll take her when we can.
Okay, we're live, Kamal.
Okay. Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us on this webinar. My name is Kamel Hawash. I am the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and I will be chairing this particular event. I originally come from Jerusalem, from the old city. My family lives in a number of different areas now of East Jerusalem. But as I say, tonight I will be chairing this meeting, and there'll be an opportunity for me to reflect as well. As you know, today is the 73rd anniversary of the UN General Assembly adopting Resolution 194, which affirmed the right to return. And that the resolution, and this is important for us here in the UK, passed with the support of the then UK government, which was also responsible for Balfour, as you know, or at least one of them was. So this shows that the connection that the UK government or successive governments have had. And it's been reaffirmed in law multiple times. And throughout this webinar, we'll hear more about, first about some of the background, some of the legal issues, but then experiences from different refugee areas, if you like, that Palestinians went to. So again, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Each speaker will have about 8 to 10 minutes to speak, and then there'll be opportunities for questions. Can you please put the questions in the chat? And I want to make sure you please adhere to the aims and values of PSC, including opposition to all forms of racism. And if that is violated, then you will be removed from the event. We want to have a really good event when we recall the UN resolution, what its impact has been, the continuing impact now, and to hear of different experiences that people have. So the event is being live streamed on Facebook as well. So if people aren't able to use the link, please ask them to join the Palestine Solidarity Campaign streaming on Palestine Solidarity Campaign UK on Facebook. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers and then go to the first speaker. So in reverse order at the minute, Basma Ad-Douhi, who is a Palestinian development and humanitarian scholar and PhD candidate. And she's joining us from, we think, from a refugee camp in Lebanon. Then we'll have Sausan Samara, who is in Jordan. Nidal Bitar, a Syrian Palestinian writer based in Washington. And then Lubna Shomali will open for us now, who is the Advocacy Unit Manager of Badil Resources Center for Palestinian Residency, Refugee Rights. That is a Palestinian organization committed to protecting and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees. So I'd like to now hand over to Lubna for the first talk. Lubna.
Thanks, Kamal, and thanks for PSC for putting together this webinar on this very important day. December 11th, 1948, when the United Nations Human Rights Council first issued UN Resolution 194, which is one of 5, not just the only resolution, but one of 5 resolutions issued by the United Nations that spoke specifically to the right of return of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons. Not only did UN Resolution 194 speak of the return of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons, but also spoke about compensation, property restitution, and guarantees of non-repetition. Those 4 components, voluntary repatriation, or more commonly known as return, property restitution, compensation, and guarantees of non-repetition or victim satisfaction, those are the components of the right to reparations. And reparations is what is issued to victims of human rights violations and international crimes. Now, if If we want to go back and see the situation in 1948 and since then, and even practically prior to 1948, one of the fundamental truths about Palestine or the Palestinian situation is that the Nakba is ongoing. It is not a situation that is isolated explicitly to the historic events of 1948, where we had the largest wave of Palestinian displacement, or the period in which the largest number of Palestinians found themselves to be displaced and thereby becoming either refugees or internally displaced person. But this ongoing displacement and dispossession is an ongoing phenomenon. The international community continues to both witness and ignore the ongoing displacement and dispossession of the Palestinian people that was initiated during that time, during historic Nakba. The end result, of course, then, is the creation, sustainment, and augmentation of the largest and longest standing displaced population in the world, consisting of almost 67% of the Palestinian people. Now let's just think about that for a minute. 67% of the Palestinian people, that roughly estimates into about 9 million people. And if we think about that even further, that number means that out of every 10 Palestinians you meet, 7 of them will have experienced displacement at least once in their lifetime, with significant numbers having experienced it more than once. Why? Because the displacement is ongoing. It didn't stop in 1948. It didn't stop in 1967 with the occupation of the rest of Palestine. And we still see displacement happening today. This reality that we exist in is achieved by a vicious cycle of ongoing displacement and the simultaneous prevention of return. This cycle is a consequence of a plethora of Israeli laws, practices, and policies that culminate in a colonial and apartheid regime that perpetuates population transfers to alter the demographic composition of mandatory Palestine. And of course, the annexation of its historic lands. Population transfers are prohibited according to international human rights law and international humanitarian law, particularly if it's perpetrated unlawfully in unlawfully annexed territory and or to alter the demographic composition of that territory. So population transfer encapsulate both the implantation of a foreign population into an annexed territory or the forced displacement of the indigenous or habitual residents out of that territory. So we are talking about the commission of international crimes, which have consequences under international law. But one of the major entitlements or the way to rectify those international crimes is to provide those victims with the right to reparations. So once displaced, obligations fall upon the perpetrator, in this case, Israel, and the international community to right this internationally wrongful act through the exercise, in this case, of offering a reparations package, which of course would include those 4 components that I mentioned earlier: voluntary physical repatriation or return, property restitution, compensation, and guarantees of non-repetition. It should be noted that the right of return is fundamental in the Palestinian context, as it is both an individual and a collective right. It's intrinsically connected to the right of self-determination. Any attempt in securing self-determination without addressing the right of return of the millions of displaced Palestinians is unachievable. In other words, how can Palestinian self-determination be achieved if the majority of the people are not allowed to exercise their right of return? As such, the right of return of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons is an elemental facet of the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. So according to international law, the principle of the right of return is founded upon the free will of displaced individuals groups. It's based on a plethora of fundamental rights, such as the right to residency, adequate housing, safety, freedom of movement, to the right to live in dignity, free from persecution, free from discrimination, and so on and so forth. The right of return is one of 3 durable solutions that is offered to displaced groups and persons under international law. The other 2 durable solutions include resettlement in another country, or integration into the host country. Now, while there are 3 durable solutions, only one of them is considered a right under international law, and that is the right of return. It should be noted also that if an individual who has been displaced, whether they are a refugee or an internally displaced person, is only given the option of one durable solutions, then that does not mean that they have been offered the entitlement or the ability to exercise their right, nor does it fulfill their right to reparations. A second factor is that those other 2 solutions, when we talk about resettlement or integration, is that they rely on the goodwill of states. States must agree to absorb those populations. And so it is not considered, there is no such thing as the right to resettlement or the right to assimilation into the host countries. So as I said, if a refugee or IDP is only given one of the 3 durable solutions, it's not an adequate exercise of their right of return. Because as I said, the right of return is based on the free will of the individual. The right of return is independent of refugee status, nationality, or the causes of displacement that was created for the purpose of preventing or addressing situations of statelessness and population transfers. The refugee or IDP condition is created by the commission of human rights violations or international crimes by states or other actors under its jurisdiction, or the failure of states to ensure national protection for people under its jurisdiction. Ensuring protection of persons in need becomes an international responsibility when the state in question is unwilling or unable to ensure it. In other words, international protection through international intervention is triggered by Israel's unwillingness to provide and ensure protection for the Palestinian people under its jurisdiction. First and foremost, the priority, of course, is to prevent the creation of a forcibly displaced population, or prevent the creation of refugees and IDPs. And if, unfortunately, the group or individuals are forcibly displaced, we must ensure their ability to exercise or provide them with their right to reparations in order to correct the wrong that has been committed. With regards to reparations mechanisms, the establishing and/or maintaining of security and stability are important concerns in deciding how, but not whether, to implement the right of return. Justice and access to legal redress are important components, of course, for stability and security. The right of reparations was designed to achieve exactly that, restoring as much as possible what once was, and eliminating the apartheid and colonial practices and/or legislation that caused the internationally wrongful acts in the first place. It goes without saying, of course, that refugee and IDP return must be gradual and orderly. It must be carried out according to tested and established mechanisms, taking into consideration the equitable redistribution of property and ensuring, of course, social and economic integration of the returnees. The national legislation needs to adequately reflect and address reparation-related issues and not be discriminatory in nature or in practice. As such, the question of the nature of the state, that will receive Palestinian refugees and IDPs is of the utmost importance. And of course, a state that is democratic, participatory, and inclusive can embrace all peoples and ensure rights for all, regardless of their religious affiliation. However, the current Israeli regime employs discriminatory national legislation and practices that constitute colonization and apartheid. It is necessary, of course, then to dismantle the apartheid colonial regime and replace it with a democratic and inclusive one that respects the rights of all people. Hence, the nature of the state that is required is one that ensures equality and equity for all, regardless of religious affiliation, ethnicity, race, or demographic composition. The right to reparations of forcibly displaced persons, according to the framework law and other treaties on reparations, as I said, consists of four main elements: voluntary repatriation or return, property restitution, compensation, and guarantees of non-repetition. The elements of reparations was established to ensure the restoration as much as possible to what once was for victims of forced displacement and transfer. As such, the elements are indivisible, and reparations packages must include all four elements for it to be successful and effective, so that the consequences of the forced displacement and the transfer are reversed. One of the arguments proposed by Israel is that there's not enough land to accommodate large numbers of Palestinian returnees and subsequent property restitution. This is not accurate. As a matter of fact, there are significant tracts of land on which Palestinian villages existed that are still not populated, and the land is available for reclamation. Most of the Zionist Israeli colonies established in Palestine actually occurred adjacent to the villages that were demolished. And there are statistics there. I believe Salman Abu Sitta has done some work on this. And it is known that 71, I believe, % of the villages that were demolished and destroyed in 1948 are still empty, vast tracts of land. So the fact that Israel says that there is not enough land for Palestinian return is not necessarily true. Also, according to Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 92% of Israelis live in urban areas. It should be noted that significant amounts of land are considered in the public domain. In other words, 93% of the land in Israel, about 4 million acres, or about 19.5 million dunams, is either the property of the state, the Jewish National Fund, or the Development Authority. This land is managed by the Israeli Land Authority, whose policy is dictated by the Israel Land Council. When we talk about situations of secondary occupancy, in the minimal instances, let's say, of when there is an Israeli colonizer inside or inhabiting Palestinian land or property, international law and best practice is very clear in situations like this. Not all property rights are equal. Secondary occupancy rights would not block refugee or IDP return or restitution. Israel is responsible to ensure alternative housing for the secondary occupants in cases where refugees and IDPs seek property restitution. Further, if the property was acquired in good faith by the secondary occupant, then he or she is also entitled to compensation, which also Israel must provide. Another point to note with regards to property restitution and the numbers of Palestinian refugees. But before I get to that, one of the common arguments or one of the Israeli talking points is also that the only refugees who supposedly have the right to return are those original 1948 refugees and not their descendants. This is also a false claim made by Israel, because international law clearly dictates that any descendant of a or IDP is also a refugee and IDP, because international law states that the only way your refugee or IDP status can be eliminated or terminated is when you are provided with the right to reparations and the right to return. So in that way, there is no way for those Palestinians who are displaced and who are the descendants of those who are displaced to be able to exercise that right of return. And so therefore they would hold that refugee or IDP status until such a situation was created. But going back to that, the numbers of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons, a mechanism, if we're talking about the right of return in a practical sense, a mechanism needs to be developed and put in place to equitably reallocate the original property to a larger group of victims. For example, if a Palestinian from XYZ village owned 1,000 dunams of land, but this person's descendants now number, let's say, I don't know, 120 refugees, a mechanism to distribute the land between the 120 needs to be developed and implemented. This would naturally require the participation and engagement of Palestinian refugees and IDPs themselves to determine the modes of distribution. I have just a few more things to say. I know. In summation, reparations goes hand in hand with sustainable post-conflict reconstruction, not just political, physical, or structural, but also legal, ideological, social, and economic reform. Reparations were designed to restore a lost right, restore the physical property lost and or the equivalent and or monetary compensation, to promote justice and reconciliation, and that process must contribute to an economic uplift, because the situation that is created post-return must be more beneficial than the situation we are in today or the situation that we were in 1948. While the current conditions are not conducive to achieving just and durable solutions to the Palestinian refugee and IDP situation, in other words, the implementation of the right to reparations, we need not wait for these preconditions to be met or a robust peace agreement to be exacted to prepare for Palestinian return. It is paramount that preparations for refugee and IDP reparations begin now in order to be optimally successful. We can start with extensive awareness and education campaigns focusing on the principles and best practices of return, kind of like what we're doing today. And we can engage Palestinian civil society, particularly the refugees and IDPs, in developing reparations models and mechanisms, including property redistribution and compensation. And I'll stop there. And hopefully I didn't go too much over time.
Thank you very much indeed. It was really important to set the scene with that background. I'd just quickly like to share my screen with a couple of maps. So here is one which shows where the Palestinians went to. So this, as you know, is the map of historic Palestine. And this shows the numbers, in fact, that went to Lebanon, to Syria, to Jordan, and to Egypt. And I'll just quickly scan down to one towards the end, which I think would be interesting for people here, which shows the issue about, is there enough space for everyone? So this was produced to show that actually if the Palestinian refugees, of all of them return, there would be space. They'd be going to or near where they had been expelled from in 1948. So I'll stop the screen share there, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points that Lubna talked to. There was a heck of a lot in there, but the point is, this is a right to return. That's the point. And Lubna mentioned Salman Abu Sitta, who talks about now exercising the right. It's not that we're still calling for it. It should happen. And we'll talk more about what happened at the fence in Gaza, where people were trying to exercise that right, and that people tried to return from Lebanon in the past and were shot and so on, maybe as we go through. So what I'd like to do now is to move straight to Nidal Bitar, who's a Syrian Palestinian writer based in Washington, D.C., who will tell us about his upbringing and his thoughts on this issue. Over to you, Nidal.
Well, thank you so much, Kamal, and thank you for PSC for organizing this, and thank you, Lubna, for the background, the legal actually, and terminology that you provided us with. I want just to jump straight forward to the consequences of the Nakba, specifically on creating the refugees, refugees in camps in different countries, 500,000 Palestinians in Syria and 12 camps. And that similar number, maybe we don't know the accurate number in Lebanon, because the number of refugees, the population of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon goes up and down based on the political situation in that country. It ranges ridiculously between 350,000 and 500,000, and all these refugees and then in Jordan as well. And refugees in these countries, they lived under different conditions, and they were treated based on the rules of these countries. And as a result, this created societies of Palestinian refugees, like people who lived in Syria. They were treated in based on the Syrian rules. So, for example, for us in Syria, we had all rights, right of education, right to work, all these things, but of course, we did not have the right to vote or run for elections. Neither Syrians have it anyway. In Lebanon, it's like a different and heartbreaking story that over 75 years until now, Palestinians in Lebanon, they do not have the right to work. You go to the camps in Lebanon and you see people, doctors, engineers, people with PhDs, studied in America and the UK and around the world, and they go back to Lebanon and then they do not find a work, or they are not allowed to work actually in Lebanon. So one of the consequences of Nakba was generating or creating all these generations of Palestinians who were 750,000 when they left Palestine, and their descendants now about 5 million Palestinians around the world. And all these people, especially in the host countries or what's called host countries for refugees, they lived as refugees. They do not have any kind of identification that would give them the right to live in dignity. So basically, we're stateless. So this is for me as Nidal, was born in a refugee camp in Damascus in 1979. My parents were refugees, and they did not have any paperwork. They were just refugees, and I was born as a refugee. And then when the Syria war started, I left Syria as a refugee, and until today I am a refugee. So this is ridiculous. How many generations? My grandfather, my father, my mother, and me, and I am, except my daughter's in America now because she was born here. But imagine if my daughter was born in Lebanon, for example, because when the Syria war started, I left Syria to Lebanon. Imagine if she was born in Lebanon. She will be not only stateless, she will be documentless. I will not be able to give her any kind of document that would like define the identify herself with. In this context of talking about the conditions in the Arab in the host countries, the right to return was really used as a very as a strong political tool by some Arab by the Arab regimes, like starting from Nakba until today, actually. Like the Arab League decided that these people who left Palestine, they should not be given any kind of citizenship or whatever, just to protect the right to return. And in this, like as a result of this decision, Palestinians, generation after generation, grew up stripped of their human rights, although they are like a political card for all these regimes. And like we have a lot of examples. We have living history even like about these things. There is not a single conflict in any Arab country that spared Palestinians. From 1970 in Jordan to the civil war in Lebanon, and now to the current situation and conflict in Syria. I would say that, like, because we were talking about how we were excited to go to the borders, like in 2011 twice, first one on Nakba Day, and the second one on Nakba Day in May and June 2011. I would tell you, like, for me as a Syrian Palestinian, I was not all my life allowed to go to the borders between the Syrian borders between like Syria and the Golan and the occupied Golan. I was not. I need like a huge paperwork, security permissions just to go and like stand across like other borders and look and talk to at Golan Heights. That like in 2011, these permissions were not required anymore. We just like people just rushed to the borders, and people were really honest. They were really excited. Like they really believed that they are crossing the borders from Syria to Palestine. Some people really did. They went like to Akka and Jaffa and etc. However, people were killed too by the Israeli army across the borders. Like the Israeli army, I remember I was there that day. The Israeli army in June, it was in June 5th, 2011. They really crossed the borders from Golan Heights, occupied heights to the Syrian side, and they shot and killed about 30 Palestinian refugees from around the camps in Syria, and so many people also were killed in Lebanon and West Bank and Gaza as well. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's like after 75 years, we're still discussing if Palestinians really have any rights, especially the Palestinian refugees. I know, like, we are like Palestinians, like we have different conditions. People who live in like under in Israel are different than their conditions, different than the people who live in West Bank and Gaza and us. But all of us, we are lack of rights, all of us. And the right to return is only one of them, actually. Also, like, it is the main one, it is essential one, and it is like, and we owe this like right, and we owe the story of the right to return to our parents, to our grandparents, to their suffering and to their sacrifices. But it's ridiculous that after 75 years, and I am 40 years old now, and I do not have a paperwork to identify myself. like here in the United States, when I came, oh, okay, so you're Syrian Palestinian. Okay, I understand the meaning of Syrian. What do you mean by Palestinian? And you know, it's like it's real to an extent, but I think our story as Palestinians was politicized to the maximum, extremely politicized by everyone, by every single government, especially in the Arab world. It was politicized to an extent that it stripped us from every single right, like even the right to live, and even like maybe the right to be buried after you die. My grandmother, when she died in Damascus, it was a huge issue to bury her in 2013 or 2014. I don't remember, like maybe 2013. We could not bury her in her neighborhood in Damascus because she's Palestinian refugee, and we have to get a lot of paperwork to find a place to bury her. Like even more now in the conflict in Syria, like in the war in Syria. I want to share. Actually, I want to close with this story. My father was born in Nazareth, and in 1947, so he left Palestine when he was only 1 year old, and then they moved to Syria. In Syria, as all other refugees, Palestinian refugees, they started working, suffering, and building themselves up from scratch. So my father built like his nice building, 60 years of working in Syria and saving and raising us and difficulties and etc. And then the war in Syria starts. He went back when ISIS left Yarmouk camp. My father tried to go and see his house. He told me, you know, like I really could not recognize the streets. I had to find a pole of iron just like to lean on it and climb the rubbles to try to find my house. And then one of our neighbors saw him. He said, "Hey, Abu Nidal, what are you doing here?" He said, "Oh, I'm looking for my house." He said, "Oh yeah, that's your house." So he said, I looked, I did not find it, like 3 stories on the ground. Like his work for all, and he said, like, I looked at it, I said, like, and laughed and laughed and laughed. And I said, that's fine, my kids are safe. It breaks my heart, you know, like these, like the wars and our story over and over again is ongoing, and it's not only fragmenting our societies, our camps, our social structure. Man, it's fragmenting our families. I have a Swedish sister now. I have a Swedish brother, and I have a Norwegian sister as well. You know, like they are all over the European Union. And I'm here in the United States, trying to be a citizen, like in this chaos. I don't want to take long, but say that our story as Palestinian refugees, and our story with the right to return should really be rewritten in the context of a human rights in this world, like that we are a human and we have rights. Also, although I know that the whole world now verge on collapsing the international community, the international humanitarian law, the human rights law, and norms are not do not apply anywhere. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I took that long.
No, thank you so much, Nidal. That was really helpful to bring us to the current continuing suffering of the Palestinian people. As I was saying to you before we started, I know Yarmouk camp very well. My family used to have a flat in Damascus itself, and we used to go every summer. And I mentioned one of my cousins whose pharmacy you recognize, which was again wiped out when the camp fell. So, and of course, we know how many Syrians ended up in Lebanon, or Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and there may be questions about what's happened to them since, whether they've been allowed to return, and what do they do if they come back to Yarmouk and there's nowhere for them to live. Okay, because of the hoping to get the internet connection to Basma. Basma, are you with us? Can you hear me? If you can unmute yourself. I don't know, Lewis, if you've enabled that.
Yes, I am here.
Hi, Basma. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
So Basma Douche is speaking to us. Are you speaking from the refugee camp in Lebanon?
No, actually, I'm speaking from the UK.
You're from the UK and you couldn't get an internet connection. Well, I don't want to comment. Okay, but you have connections with the refugee camps in Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken. Would very much like to pass over to you, sort of 8 to 10 minutes, if you can, to tell us, maybe building on what we've heard already, and telling us about you're giving us your thoughts. Thank you, Basma.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about my experience as a third generation of stateless Palestinian refugees living in a camp. Actually, I come here to study my PhD in migration studies, and as a Palestinian, I was maybe the first Palestinian stateless refugee, female refugee, who gets a fully funded scholarship from the UK government and one of the UK universities to come and study this particular module of study, refugee and migration studies. In addition to that, I have also lived multiple displacement, leaving Gulf states, going to Iraq, and then to Syria, and then finally settling up in one of the Palestinian camps, which is Rashidiyya camp, which is by 10 minutes, using my own car, I will be in front of my occupied Palestinian village, Al-Bassa, in Akka district. But unfortunately, as Nidal mentioned, because I am a stateless Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and I need a lot of security permissions and a security documentation in order to go there, I am not able even to go and to see my village from the borders of occupied Palestine and Lebanon. As Nidal mentioned, and thank you so much, Nidal, for mentioning about the situation of Palestinian refugees, but I would like to say that the right of return starts by this. The right of return for particular stateless Palestinian refugees, which are very unique in their status as a refugee from the refugees in Syria, or even the refugees in Jordan or in the diaspora. We are very connected because of our suffering, because of our exclusion, because of our marginalization that we are facing on a multiple level, at multiple levels, and in a daily level, by the Lebanese authorities, and actually now by the Palestinian authorities as well in the camps, and also the official Palestinian authority, which represent Palestinians. But if you will ask the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, they will most of them will say no, because the marginalization and the exclusion of Palestinian refugees and Palestinian refugee cause have started actually from Oslo Agreement, where we don't have that official recognition of our rights, particularly our right to return to Palestine and to leave these camps that have been there as a temporary place for us for more than 72 years. And we are still keeping the hope that one day we are going to return back to our occupied villages, to our houses, to rebuild our life. And Oslo actually have destroyed all these dreams and ambitions, and also our representation on the table that these refugees have that right to return back. And descendants of refugees, which are like myself, it's not about only my father or my grandparents, it's about myself also having the opportunity to return back to Al-Bassa. So right of return is fundamental for our identity, and it's fundamental actually for our resistance to live in these overcrowded and camps that have all the bad conditions, that don't have human living conditions for people to live, with all the problems of overcrowdedness, security concerns, exclusion of the camps, stigmatization about the Palestinian camps, stigmatization about the Palestinian refugees. So we keep that kind of hope. We fight for it, actually, and it becomes about a part of our identity and a part of our how we see this world and how the world seen us as well as a Palestinian refugees in the camp, particularly in the Arab countries. Because as I mentioned, if I want to share this story, my father left Gulf area after 23 years working and supporting one of the governments there because he is Palestinian. He came to Syria, to Iraq to continue working, and he left because he was Palestinian. He came to Syria and he suffered a lot from a number of insecure or unhuman practices because of he is Palestinian, and we ended up in a refugee camp in Lebanon. So for me, as a Palestinian, I was always having that kind of identity crisis, if I want to say, not because I don't feel that I am Palestinian. No, of course, it's deep in my heart and in my daily practices and in my identity. But actually, it's the way that people look at us and identify us. Because in Lebanon, I don't know if I am stateless, if I am foreigner, if I am a refugee, if I am asylum seeker, if I am a migrant. I worked also with UN, if I am a diplomat as well, if I am a UN staff or not, because at the end of the day, they will not look at you as a Palestinian, like Basma, she is a UN staff. No, Basma, she is Palestinian. Okay, that's fine. It's, of course, I am Palestinian, but all these kind of struggles, all these kind of the people who try to shape you and to identify you and to put you in the corner, and just because you are living in a camp makes our cause in the camps very particular and very difficult as well. Unfortunately, also, like, we are forgotten, not presented by, if you want to say, like Palestinian refugees in the camps, as I mentioned before, most of them don't recognize the Palestinian Authority as their representative. But at the same time, these Palestinian authorities and all the diplomacy that it's done for the protection and for the rights of Palestine, Palestinian refugees are always forgotten, not presented, their rights, their living in the camps, and even their right of return, which is very fundamental for these people. And it's a core part of the Palestinian cause and Palestinian fight. If you tell me, or if you would like to hear my opinion, I can say there is no justice if these Palestinian refugees don't have the option and the opportunity to go back. And they have to decide if they want to go back or not. But we need that kind of decision and the self-determination. And this is even not recognized and not given for us by our representative, between two brackets, if you want to say. And all of these actually, like, that made us forgotten and our cause forgotten, particularly the cause of Palestinian camps. I had always that kind of a dream to go out of the camp. Because of the conditions of the camp and because of all the situation that I am suffering as a Palestinian, but adding also me as a female living in Lebanon, studying in Lebanon, I don't have my basic human rights. For example, I am prevented from the right of work and prevented from because the numbers keep changing. Sometimes I discover that this profession, it's not included. We have to include it for Palestinian. So like for 34 professions, which mean I can learn, I can pay for the Lebanese institution or higher education institutions, but I cannot practice. I cannot, for example, this is a funny issue actually. Palestinians cannot get a taxi car and they cannot work as a taxi driver in Lebanon. Palestinians cannot be fishermen like a fisher in Lebanon. Palestinians don't cannot own property. And Nidal mentioned about the situation that he cannot bury his grandma. Actually, now in the camps of Lebanon, we are not finding places to bury our dead. And we are like struggling. So, like in some of the camps, we are using the resources outside of the camp if the Lebanese government and authorities allow us. Or we, for example, in Rashidiyya camp, we are burying our dead near the sea, which is inhuman and not dignified, because these people kept living in these very inhuman conditions, dreaming to return back to Palestine. But when they are died, they don't have, and this is really it's very difficult for me as a Palestinian, feeling worried if I get my father or my mom died, where should I bury them? And these all situations and all these conditions helped us to keep that kind of return very tight to our hearts, and to transfer this right to third generations. I am a third generation. I have never known about Palestine before, but my grandparents were really resistant and consistent to tell us the stories of Al-Bassa, and to keep that kind of right of return, the dream of right of return, the duty of right of return in our heart and in our daily practices. When I come to the UK, and every Palestinian, particularly from the camps of Lebanon, understand this very well, that we need to fight for our right of return in a very particular way, because people don't know about us actually. So if you tell them you are Palestinian, oh, okay, you are from Gaza, oh, from West Bank, oh, from Jerusalem. No, I am a stateless refugee from Lebanon. Oh, Lebanon, and you are stateless. What do you mean by stateless? So we are really forgotten. And this makes my heart feel very sad, because we are dividing this cause, the Palestinian cause, into different aspects. And the right of return and the refugee rights is the last and the forgotten discussion and item in the agenda or in the discussion. So I keep going from university to university and keep attending events and join events to speak and to raise awareness about stateless Palestinian refugees in the camp, particularly in Lebanon, and why right to return is very fundamental and important to us in this struggle and in this cause. And actually, I will tell this story, which meant a lot for me, but also meant a lot for the people who attended, particularly from non-Palestinian origin. When I came to study my master in the MA in the UK for the MA, I attended INERWA 71 conference in London. And the ambassador for Palestinian Authority mentioned a number of stuff about Palestinian cause. And he forgot to mention about Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and Palestinian refugees in Syria, and Palestinian refugees in Jordan. And actually, yes, he mentioned that Palestine, it's the West Bank and Gaza. So I just raised my hand and told him, look, Palestinians also live in Lebanon, and Palestinians also live in Syria, and Palestinians also live in Jordan. And you are telling us that we don't want to return. He said, right of return, we should discuss it, and maybe not all the people or the Palestinians would like to return. I said to him, I remember, look, I am a third generation of Palestinian refugees who have never been to Palestine, but I want to return, and you should not speak on behalf of us. Palestinian refugees, they should speak on behalf of themselves and say if we want to return or not. And actually, I discovered that most of the participants were from generation, like descendants of refugees, and they were living in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And for him, thank you so much for mentioning this. But I was really annoyed because, yes, our right to return and our cause as Palestinians from the camps and the recognition is not there. It's not there in your diplomacy here in the UK. It's not there in your diplomacy with the United Nations. And it's not there in your agenda actually from Oslo till now. And all these normalizations and the deal of the century and what's happening all around make Palestinians stateless refugees in Lebanon and who are living in the camps of Syria and Jordan more vulnerable, if I want to say, but yet more resistant, more resilient, to keep fighting for the right of return, to keep raising awareness about this fundamental right, and to raise the most important part, to raise awareness about the living conditions of these people who have been forgotten for more than 72 years in the camps of Lebanon, with all the inhuman conditions that I hope all of you know about, particularly now with COVID-19, with the economic situation of Lebanon, and with all the denial of our human basic rights. We keep fighting for this, we keep believing this, and in my opinion, there are no justice, or there will be no justice for Palestinians and for Palestinian cause if Palestinians don't have the right to determine and to decide to go back to, or to return back to Palestine.
And I think that's a really good point to maybe end on, Basma, because that's absolutely what I hear. I visited some of the refugee camps in Lebanon, and there are two questions you get. The first one is, where are you from? When they see that you're a foreigner, and if you like, not from the camp, and I say I've come from the UK, and then they say, where are you from? And that is, which part of Palestine do you come from? And as you know, Amr Zahir, the comedian, uses that, the Palestinian American comedian, but it's true. We're all linked together. I remember when I was growing up, I was born in Saudi Arabia. At my father's work, when people would come in who are Palestinian, the first thing they do is that, the connection. And do you know, particularly in Jerusalem, that particular, my family is well known for making sweets in Jerusalem, Al-Hawash family. And so that would begin the linkage, where you are from and who you're connected with. So it's really important you all talk to us about the refugees, but particularly in Syria and Lebanon. And we're now going to move on to Jordan and Sausan Samara. Welcome, Sausan.
Thank you. Thank you for the floor, and thank you for everybody that spoke already. So I wanted to start with, so I'm based in Jordan, and then I would say maybe we're a bit more fortunate to be Jordanian, not just Palestinian. But the theory always went that if you don't give Palestinians citizenship to that country, they will never forget Palestine. But if you do, then they will, right? So I'm going to share a little story that I ran across just a couple of days ago, which proves otherwise, actually. So I was going to a print shop to print. I'm working on this logo on my background, the other side. And it's basically for olive oil from Palestine, and I'll get to that later. And I was going to print it, and I heard the designer next to me. So I'm working on the computer, setting up whatever. And the designer next to me was talking to a client, which is an old man that's from Jordan. And in Jordan, you have the Jordanian, and then Palestinian. And everybody always asks, are you Jordanian or Palestinian? But I found that designer voluntarily asking the old man, where are you from? And the man said, I am from, I don't remember, Ajloun or something, a place in Jordan. And then the designer was like, I'm from Hebron. And it caught my attention because I haven't heard such a conversation in a long time. And I looked at him and I was like, are you really from Hebron? Because I was excited. And he was like, well, my parents. I was like, have you been to Hebron? He was like, no. I was like, but you still identify yourself as from Hebron. And he says, of course, this is where I'm from. And just to show that regardless of our living conditions, what has been taken away from us will not be forgotten. We are from there, and we have to go back to there, and this is our inalienable right. And like I said, in Jordan, we're fortunate that we were offered citizenship, so we are Jordanians that practice our rights in voting and working and so on and so forth. But that doesn't apply to everybody. It depends when you came to Jordan. And basically, the later you came, the less rights you have. And you have about a bit more than 200,000 people, particularly from Gaza, actually, that are citizenshipless. They're stateless, they live in Jordan, and their one concentration they have is called the Gaza camp. And I was fortunate enough to visit Gaza camp a couple of weeks ago because I wanted to include them in a study and make sure that their voice is heard, because people don't know about them. People think that in Jordan everybody's fine and Palestinians are settled and so on and so forth. And in Gaza, similar to Lebanon, I felt like I walked out of Jordan for like 5 minutes or whatever, the hour I was there, and walked into Lebanon, a refugee camp, or even the West Bank, a place in the West Bank or something, because the energy was so different. The determination was very different. The connection, the way they spoke. These people haven't had rights. They cannot work. Their rights were taken away from them slowly as more refugees, came into Jordan. They had less and less rights because Jordan is trying to protect its resources, basically. And regardless, the energy they had and the determination they had was stronger than anyone else in Jordan I interviewed. They were determined to find a living, determined to continue, determined to stay connected to Palestine. I asked them, do you talk to people in the West Bank or Gaza? And they're like, all the time. This is our family, these are our people, and we will never disconnect. So just to say the connection is just as strong. The situation is just as bad, and the refugees are refugees regardless whether or not the living conditions are exacerbated, let's say. However, the interesting part as well I wanted to say is that in Jordan, people pride themselves so much that they still wait for that olive oil to come from the West Bank, right? They do not buy Jordanian olive oil. The first time they bought Jordanian olive oil was last year because the borders were closed. And they could not reach or access Palestinian olive oil. So it continues. But in terms of going back to, or connecting it back to my colleague Lubna Shomali, which gave us the legal background, I wanted to connect it further to the apartheid idea. And we always think of apartheid as between the river and the sea, or we recently started thinking of apartheid between the river and the sea. But basically, apartheid affects every single Palestinian in every single place they are at. According to Dr. Richard Falk and Dr. Virginia Telly in the Esquire report, Israeli practices towards the Palestinian people and the question of apartheid, we are all under apartheid, including Palestinians in diaspora and Palestinian refugees. But you will probably ask me, how is that so? But the answer is simple, because we are discriminated against because of our race. The fact that we're not Jewish doesn't allow us to go back, while the fact that any Jew, even though we have roots, or some of us are even born there, meanwhile, a Jew that's born anywhere, that has no prior links in terms of immediate family member being born there or themselves being born there, are allowed to go at any point. And that in itself is racial discrimination based on racial discrimination in its essence and systematized. Furthermore, I wanted to say today, the problem, looking forward, actually, I see more of a threat today. So that, as my colleague Lubna said, the Nakba continues. It's not over. It's not even getting easier, unfortunately. If anything, what's coming is in my head scarier. The deal of the century, or whatever, the Trump deal that was claimed to be the deal of the century, is one very evident threat that there's a Balfour Declaration or a hidden treaty or a deal. I mean, they put it out there, but something that's in the making, that's slowly unfolding. Shortly after, there was the move to defund UNRWA. And why is that dangerous? Because UNRWA is the entity that saves our rights of return. It's the entity that solidifies it, it keeps it. It's the entity that also has all our records. I happened to walk into an UNRWA office not knowing that this was an option, and realized that they actually registered every single Palestinian that left or left where they lived in their records. So you can actually pull out, I found out stuff about my family that I didn't know through their records. So they hold that right for us. So it's very important that we work on making sure UNRWA continues, because it is the entity that reminds the world that we are here and we have rights in Palestine and the right to return. The other thing I wanted to say is that another very evident step that was taken towards disconnecting Palestinian refugees is the 2009 privatization of land. So up until 2009, any land within what is called today the State of Israel was under the custodian Council for Absentee Property. However, today it is being privatized and sold, and it's an approach to further disconnect Palestinian refugees abroad from their land and from their actual physical place. And I see these very dangerous steps happening slowly. And the third event is something that I saw yesterday, which I was reading in the news and reading it between the lines, but there was a very right-wing reporter, Israeli right-wing reporter, that went flat out on TV saying that it is time to put all these Palestinians that are left into buses and out to the borders. It is time to do another Nakba. And this discourse is not just him. I've heard that before, news here and there. It is alarming how far Israel is going in not only disconnecting us Palestinians from our lands, but also making sure that we're not returning, and making sure that anyone that's left there is not there anymore, making sure that we disappear from the land. So just to end it there, I just want to say that it's very important to continue supporting and ensuring UNRWA is alive, and it's very important to maintain the discourse of the inalienable Palestinian rights of return. It has been removed off the table for so long. I believe the apartheid, the recognition of Israel as an apartheid regime is a strong opportunity to re-put it on the table very strongly, because it unifies all Palestinian and what they're suffering. It unifies Basma, Nidal, Kamil, Lubna, and myself under this one umbrella of how we're suffering from Israel together. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. That's really enlightening, Sosan. And I'll add my story. So I have a Jordanian passport and a British passport. And I used to go to Palestine regularly. I'm married to a lady from Attur in Al-Quds. And on one of my trips in 2017, they denied me entry and sent me back. So I now can't go back, which means I know exactly how a refugee feels. I'm not saying I didn't understand that before, but that has now happened to me. I cannot return unless the occupier allows me to go in. I also remember, because Iraq was mentioned, when the Saddam Hussein regime fell, that Palestinians, first of all, were shifted to the borders, and then some of them ended up in Brazil. Instead of going back to Palestine, they actually ended up in Brazil. I'll never forget that nice old man crying his eyes out in Brazil saying, why? Why can't I go back to Iraq, and why can't I go back to Palestine? So I'll take some of the questions very quickly. Thank you all so much for these talks and for the memories. I let them, if you like, go on in the nicest possible way, because I think people here want to hear what Palestinian refugees have to say. And I'm sure, first of all, everyone agrees as to how eloquent and clear you all spoke. The Palestinian people are an educated, cultured people who know how to express themselves well. We have the smallest number of people who can't read or write. I've forgotten the words, just left me when I came to say it, in the whole of the Middle East. Education is thoroughly important because people know you can carry it with you wherever you go on your journey, as we heard earlier. So, I mean, the main question that is really coming through is saying, okay, so this has been in place, this right of return for 74 years, and I don't want to open up another webinar, but why hasn't it been implemented? So I don't know who of you would like to have a go at that. Why is it, since this is a UN resolution, why is it that it hasn't been implemented is the question that keeps. I have my thoughts, but I'll hand over. Shall I go to Lubna and then see who else wants to contribute?
There's a number of reasons why it hasn't been implemented, but I'd like to go back to what Nadal has said. And he said one of the things that he said is that our rights are politicized. And I would come back and say that all rights are political. It is a political battle that is also closely related to the power, creating that power balance. And Western colonial states have the power, whereas others do not have the power. So they are the ones that are able to push through their agendas through these mechanisms that have been created to kind of preserve the balance of power. Unfortunately, international law and human rights is just a mechanism. It was put in place by the international community in order to ensure and protect those that are marginalized, those that are vulnerable, those that are exposed to discrimination, those who are victims of international crimes and human rights violations. Unfortunately, there is the misuse of that mechanism by powerful Western states. And they misuse that mechanism for political gain and power. They misuse it for financial gain and power, and they misuse it for creating strategic strongholds in areas. And so, unfortunately, this is why it's not being implemented. Not because there is something wrong with the framework itself. As we said, the right of return and the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people are two of the inalienable rights. And what that word means is that it is indestructible. Those rights have no limits with regards to time. So they don't have any temporal limitations. And they cannot be compromised by Israel or our leadership, because there was a discussion also happening. I think Besma brought it up about the Palestinian Authority and our representation and so on and so forth. So even if the Palestinian Authority were to say they wanted to compromise on the right of return, international law prevents that. Now, having said that, we have this fabulous framework in place that we can use to advocate for our rights in order to pressure the international community and those with power in order to adhere to their responsibilities under international law. And so this is where our resistance and the support of the international solidarity movement becomes important. So I answered the question as to why the right of return and other Palestinian rights aren't being implemented. But now, how can we change that political will? How can we change that pressure and impose our will, the people's will, on those political entities and the international community? And the only way to do that is to resist and to put pressure on them with various means. One of the means, of course, is legal advocacy, working through those different mechanisms like the ICC, the ICJ, the Commission of Inquiry that was recently created by the UN to investigate apartheid in Palestine, and other such legal mechanisms. But there's also other types of mechanisms as well, such as boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is a very important mechanism of resistance to use and was successful in apartheid South Africa and can be successful as well for the Palestinian people. And there's also, of course, popular resistance, through demonstrations, through sit-ins, through writing our congressmen or our parliamentarians, and so on and so forth. So we do have mechanisms, we do have tools that we can use to resist and to change that tide, change the political will through various means.
Thank you so much for that. I think because I don't want people leaving because we're going on for too long. If I can go to each of the other speakers for a quick 1-minute summation. I mean, I'll just read a couple of questions which one of you might comment on. One of them was about, someone mentioned 9 million Palestinians. Where does that come from? And then there was, what do people live on in the camps? Overseas aid, etc. I think UNRWA was mentioned as and is the main source, but that is struggling because lots of countries have reduced their contribution, and some of the Arab countries have unfortunately gone much further than that. I'll leave it at that. And then let me see what other question. Yeah, I think they were the main questions. So if I can go to maybe to Nidal, then to Basma, and then to Southland for a 1-minute final sort of thoughts.
Thank you, Kamal. A few things I want to mention very quickly. The first one is like we have to admit, like, because Basma mentioned this, like about the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. We have to admit that we have a dismantled political structure that is like really a disaster. And I think what happened in Sheikh Jarrah recently in Jerusalem is a very good example about our political system that should be absolutely rebuilt. And this rebuilding these institutions of PLO, it should be by allowing refugees to participate in elections and like for all PLO institutions. The second one, I want to emphasize what Sousan has said about UNRWA. Like dismantling UNRWA and canceling it and defunding it is disastrous. It's not because like we have like let's be clear. What UNRWA is giving us, like in humanitarian aid, medicine, whatever, like it has been reduced over the years, like significantly, but it's symbolic. It is one of the proofs of our tragedy, and it protects our right to return as an institution. We have always to remember that all refugees around the world, they have one refugee agency. It's UNHCR, and Palestinians, they have their own UNRWA, which was like positive sometimes, and it was a curse many other times. Other than that, I want like also to close by saying that we as Palestinians, we protected our identity because like of the suffering of our grandparents and our parents, because of like the life they lived. I have to say that like my everyday story before I go to bed was sitting with my grandmother and telling me the story, how she left from Safad and went to Ras al Naqoura in Lebanon, and and then from like to Syria to Hama, and then back to Damascus, and how she started teaching. My grandmother was a teacher in Nazareth when she left, like, and she was 13 years old when she left Palestine, and she was a teacher, she was educated. And she started teaching again in Syria. And when UNRWA started, she spent her life, all her career, like until she died teaching in UNRWA schools. These stories, like, they are embedded in our identity, in our personality, in our traditions, and our values that we protected over the years. Even if the camps are being dismantled now and destroyed in the conflicts and the wars in the host country, Palestinians, they have unique capacity to protect their identity and their values, and this struggle is going to go on.
Thank you so much, Basma. Yep, unmute. Maybe. Does Lewis need to do it? Let's go to Sausan while that is happening. If she can unmute, let's try Sausan. Okay, go on, Basma.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I will start from what Nidal have finished. As Palestinians, third generation or fourth generations or whatever generation, we have the right and we have the duty, and we will keep our identity, keep our right of return, and keep our own Palestine in our hearts and our daily practices and our education and in everything that we do. And we will keep sharing this identity with our children, with anybody in this world, to keep this cause alive. But here I want to say education is a key and a core issue. Please educate yourself as Palestinians, whenever or wherever they are, in diaspora, in refugee camps, in Palestine, as we are keeping and fighting for right of return and keeping to fight this Palestinian cause alive in the minds and in the hearts in this of the people in this world. Please keep learning about this cause from Palestinians. Keep listening to us, to Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but in refugee camps and diaspora. Keep asking these questions and keep supporting our cause using your own way, using your own power, using your own modality or tools. But actually, justice, in my opinion, justice in this world will not happen if the Palestinian cause is not solved and if Palestinian rights, particularly refugee rights, are not recognized. So help us, keep fighting with us, keep learning about us, keep sharing about us, because I do believe not in the UN resolutions, unfortunately, not in the states, unfortunately. I do keep in the power of people and in the power of people and in the power of fighting for justice, sharing our stories, listening to us, and attending these events. I would like from you, all who attended today, to go back and to share what you have learned about us, about Palestinian people and Palestine to your friends. This is the way we really can create a change from the bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Sausan.
I will just try to address quickly the questions. There was a question about 9 million Palestinians.
Yes.
I think that's the total Palestinians abroad today, which means the people that left and their kids and their kids. And then people live on UNRWA. They also are such strong personalities and have strong determination to continue living. So they do work in not very legal ways because they're not allowed to work legally, but they do find their way. And then I think there's a strong community support. Could be stronger, but it's there. And I also wanted to add that, yes, just to build on Nidal, my colleagues Nidal and Basma, we have to keep fighting. The fight is not over. I would say Palestinians are fortunate in a very ironic way to be the holders of a very just cause that brings about all the vulnerabilities of the world. So we're indigenous, we suffer apartheid, we suffer colonial settler colonialism, and every injustice that happens in the world you can think of, we have it. We're suffering from it. So we, in a way, we have some power that we unite people. We unite people, vulnerable people, and our strength is in every single one of you fighting with us and speaking with us. And this is why we have to continue BDS, ICC, any other approach that we can think of, research, Salman Abu Sitta's mapping of Palestinian lands. There are lots of brilliant Palestinians speaking up about different issues and teaching also how to fight, how to keep your issue on the table, and what is that injustice that you're going through. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much. You mentioned Salman Abu Sitta. Dr. Salman Abu Sitta is one of our patrons, and he actually has just returned briefly to Gaza after 40 years. And we are hoping to host him in a webinar when he talks about that experience of going back to Gaza after 40 years. So do look out for that when it happens. I just wanted to mention a couple of things before we finish. The PLO and rebuilding. I'm a founding member of a group called the National Campaign for Rebuilding the PLO, which includes Dr. Salman Abu Sitta as it happens. And we are working to try and bring together pressure to hold elections to the Palestine National Council, which is our parliament, and there will be, hopefully you'll hear more about that as we go through. You will have noticed that everyone spoke about being Palestinian, not Arab, which is what Israel wants you all to think we are. We are Arabs. I am proud to be an Arab, but I'm a Palestinian. They're not mutually exclusive. And I just want to finish with the following. Again, as I said to you, I feel a refugee. My father died here in the UK, in Birmingham, about 20 years ago, and I couldn't take him to be buried back in Jerusalem. He's buried in Birmingham. But Robert Maxwell, who is probably known to some of you, the dreadful Robert Maxwell was buried in Jerusalem. So you can see the injustice that we have. And I always say to people, I know peace will come to Palestine when my mother, who lives here with me in Birmingham, who's also from Jerusalem, is able to go back to Jerusalem, because it is when peace happens that she'll be able to go back to Jerusalem. I want to end by saying, if you're a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, please encourage another person to become a member, and we'll double overnight. That's what I want to see happen here in the UK. If you're not a member, please join. Go to palestinecampaign.org and join there. So let's hope that my mother would return to Jerusalem, because we'll know that peace has come to the Holy Land. I want to thank you all very much indeed for attending, to thank the wonderful speakers. The old died, but the young did not forget, and they were here tonight speaking to you and telling you about their experience. And we look forward to the next webinar. Please keep looking at the PalestineCampaign.org website, and there's also a Facebook page called Palestine Events in the UK, which has all the current events. I want to thank Lewis, who's been helping us in the background. Thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, and let's hope we can meet in a free Palestine, and particularly Jerusalem. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Bye.